Welcome back to another video, everybody, on how to use a lathe. Today we're still working on our two-step project and we are on operation 80. Okay, so main goal of today's video is to learn how to cut a piece of material to length using a travel indicator. Okay, so it says mount your stock in a 3-jaw chuck having 2.5 inches of the material sticking out of the jaws. Face off the second end. To clean up, measure your part, and then we're going to cut to a length of 4 inches. So I'll give you a hint first. We're just going to measure our part first just to see what we have to work with. So here's our part. We still do have one end that has a saw cut on it. Okay, so I'm going to take my dial caliper, measure my part. It's not going to be a super accurate measurement, but it's just going to give me a ballpark about how much material I have to work with. Okay, the end goal is we want our part to be 4 inches in length. Okay, just as our drawing shows. Originally we cut our part to 4 1/8, so I should have maybe 1/8 of an inch to work with, somewhere in that range. Okay, so I'm going to take my dial caliper, measure my part. Although I have a saw cut, still going to measure it, record that measurement, then I'm going to chuck it up in the lathe. So I'm going to do this off camera. Alright, our part is about 4.165 inches, give or take. Okay, still have a saw cut end, not going to be super accurate, but I have about 0.165 inches to work with, or extra material. Okay, so I know I got over 1/8 inch extra. That's good. Okay, we'd rather have extra than not enough. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my part in the chuck, having the saw cut end sticking out. Okay, I chucked up my part. Now we need to adjust our tool for facing. Okay, currently our tool is set up for turning. The point of our tool is touching the side of our part. We want to be working on the end or the face of our part, so we need to pivot our tool about 90 degrees to the left, so the point of our tool is the only thing touching the face. Okay, should look something like this. The point of the tool is the only thing touching the face of the part. Remember, adjust your height as well, so the point of your tool is about in the center line of your part. Then what we're going to do, since we have a fair amount of material to remove, I'm going to select a roughing feed rate. Okay, so I'm going to go over to my gearbox. Roughing feed rate, a good one for steel, is about 20 thousandths of an inch. So 0.021, that's 21 thousandths, close enough. I'm going to select gear letter B, keeping my right gear in this column. So I'm going to do that. Okay, I've selected my feed rate of 21 thousandths for rough cutting. Going to go over here, move my tool away from my part. I'm going to turn the lathe on. Okay, make sure your lathe's still going at the correct speed here. You're going to have to calculate it, I'm not going to tell you. Now what we need to do is engage our clutch. See what happens. Okay, right now my carriage is moving to the left. That's not good. We're facing. So what we need to do, we need to select our cross slide. So I'm going to move my feed selection lever to the bottom. Okay, engage my clutch. See what happens. This is moving lefty-loosey. It's moving, that's good, but it's moving the wrong direction. We want our tool to travel that way, so we want this to go righty-tighty. So we need to reverse this. So I'm going to disengage the clutch, power off the lathe, and I'm going to move the feed selection lever down. Okay, start this up, engage my clutch, and now this is going righty-tighty. Okay, so our tool's traveling the correct way. Okay, now what we need to do is just face off the end of our part to clean it up. Okay, so I'm just gonna go like this, engage my tool a little bit into the part, going that way. We're not going very far. Okay, and I'm gonna start cutting. Okay, we're just removing a little bit of material at a time. Remember, we're not removing a lot. Okay, going to move my tool to the right, and by golly, I think the height of my tool is adjusted correct. We're going to stop the lathe and inspect it. All right, feel it with your finger. Make sure there's no bump. There's like an absolute micro bump, but not really much of a bump at all. So the height of my tool is good, okay? We're gonna move on to the next step. Next step, what we need to do, now that we've faced this off, we actually have a fresh machine surface. You're going to unchuck your part and you're gonna get an accurate measurement on it, okay? So you're gonna measure the length, record that, and then you are going to figure out how much material you need to remove to get it to 4 inches. All right, so my part measures 4.152 inches. Okay, so I'm gonna write that down. 4.152 inches. Okay, and I'm gonna subtract that from 4 inches. That's gonna give me a total of 0.152 inches I need to remove. Okay, remember we are rough cutting currently and we want the end of our part to be nice and smooth. So I'm gonna stay like 15 thousandths short of this. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna minus 15 thousandths from this. So minus 0 or 0.015, okay? Minus that. And that's gonna give me, let me do some math here quick. We got 0.1, we got 4, it's actually going to be 3.7, okay? That's what I need to remove, okay, for rough cutting. Remove, rough cut. Okay, then that will give me 15 thousandths I remove with finish cutting, okay? So that's my golden number. I need to remove 0.137 inches when I'm rough cutting on the high gear, okay? So I'm gonna chuck my part back up and we're gonna face off our part. All right, so I chucked up my part back in the lathe. We need to move our carriage eventually all the way to the left, 0.137 inches, okay? So how do we know how much our carriage is moving? There is no dial on here, okay? There's a dial on the cross side. We can know how much our tool is traveling into our part, but we really never know how much our tool is moving left or right, okay? Some lathes, they do have a dial here. On newer lathes, you might find that. But on most lathes, you do not have a dial right here, okay? So what we're gonna use is we're gonna use what's called a 1-inch travel indicator, and I'm gonna show you how to do the setup. This is a fancy little tool. What it measures is it measures travel in thousandths of inches of how much something moves, okay? So by pressing in this needle, I can measure how much something moves, okay? It has a magnetic back to it. So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna move the point of my tool into my part, and I'm just gonna touch it to the part, okay, with the carriage. Once it touches the part, I am going to attach this travel indicator to the bedways of my lathe or something that's magnetic, okay? You gotta magnet it to something, just don't magnet it to the threaded rod here because it will spin. So I'm gonna magnet it to my bedways, and I'm going to slide it into my carriage and apply some pressure, okay? What I don't want to do is I don't want to have this needle do more than 1 revolution because then things get confusing. So my needle's somewhere over here. I don't ever want it to go around and then past that. Otherwise things are going to get confusing. So what I like to do is I press it into my carriage and I try to get my needle straight up and down, okay? So I'm going to, whoops. Okay. Or something close, okay? So something like that. Get the needle straight up and down. You're gonna zero out your lathe, okay? Or zero out the travel indicator by turning this dial, okay? So get that needle to 0. It's just like zeroing out a dial caliper, okay? Now I can have an accurate measurement of how much I move my carriage, okay? So I'm going to back out my cross slide, okay? We're gonna start up the lathe. and I am going to move my carriage to the left. I'm gonna go, probably don't want to go more than like 20 thousandths at a time. So I'm gonna go 20 thousandths to the left. Okay, that actually moves my needle to the right, but I crank this to the left and I watch my needle. It needs to move 20 thousandths. Remember, our golden number is 0.137. So I'm gonna need to do one full revolution and then go down to 37. Okay, and then that will be all of my rough cutting. I'm gonna engage my clutch. Okay, I'll get this tool maybe a little closer first by hand. Engage my clutch, and then I start cutting. Okay, so in theory, I just shortened my part by 20 thousandths of an inch. That's the theory behind it. Okay, what's really, really crucial is that you have a rigid setup. Okay, this doesn't move. Okay, we don't want our travel indicator to move because then we're gonna have inaccuracy and then your part's not gonna be the correct length. So that's why you want to magnet it, make sure it feels nice and firm and nothing moves. Okay, so from here on out, I'm just gonna back my cross slide back out. I'm gonna move my carriage to the left another 20 thousandths, so I'm gonna go to 40. I'm going to get my tool closer to my part, and then I'm going to engage the clutch, and it's going to do some more cutting. Remember, you should be using cutting oil when you're doing this. I'm currently skipping that step because I'm just working one-handed trying to film myself, but you should be using cutting oil. We're working on steel. So I'm going to skip ahead till we get to the 37 thousandths. Alright, so I've continued facing off my part, rough cutting it. We're working on cutting it to 4 inches in length. Right now, I removed 140 thousandths total. I needed to remove 137 thousandths. I just did 140 to make things simpler. Okay, so going back over here to my little cheat sheet, I needed to remove a total of 0.152 to get me to exactly 4 inches. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I removed 140 thousandths. I now need to remove just 12 thousandths of an inch, and then my part should be to the correct length. So now I'm going to switch gears to a finish cutting gear. So I'm going to move this to gear letter E. That's going to slow it down for me. And I need to remove 12 thousandths of an inch. So I need to get to the 52 here. You could re-zero it out. I'm not going to. I just know I need to get to the 52, and then I'm good to go. So I'm going to start my lathe up. I'll actually remove the guard just for filming purposes. So I'm going to crank my carriage to the left here. I'm going to move it half of that distance. I'll go to like 46 or somewhere close. Okay, and I'm going to now do a finish cut. And I'm going to put some oil on here. Okay. Engage my clutch. And this is going to move a lot slower now. Okay. So it's going to start cutting. It's going to cut all the way through. Okay, it's going to do a finish cut. I'm not going to film the whole thing. We'll jump ahead till my last cut is just finishing up. Alright, so we're near completion here on our last cut. I did one finish cut. Now I'm just finishing up my second one. I did 2 passes of 6 thousandths of an inch. I'm now at the 1.52 material removed. We just finished our cut. I'm going to disengage the clutch. Okay, and I'm going to move my carriage to the right, get the tool off of my part, turn off the lathe. I'd grab a rag, wipe down my part, and now I'm going to measure it, okay? Alright, so I'm measuring my part. I have 4.004 inches. So I'm 4 thousandths oversized. So 4.004 inches. I'm 4 thousandths oversized, but remember, we're doing a tolerance of plus or minus 15 thousandths. So I'm within my tolerance. I'm good to go. I'm not going to sit here all day and trying to get my part perfectly to 4 inches. You could do that, but I'm within tolerance, so we're good to go. Our part is cut to length. So that is the theory behind you behind using a 1-inch travel indicator, cutting your part to length. Hope you enjoyed this video. See you on the next one.